Good morning, boys and girls. I am going to share Roanoke, the last colony, with you, or the lost colony. Excuse me, did I just say last? Awesome. An Unsolved Mystery from History by Jane Yolen, Heidi Elizabeth Yolen Stemple, and illustrated by Roger Roth. And the irony is I really do think it wants to be lost because this is the 5th time I'm going to try and record it. I have not had luck with this story yet. But I hope you'll enjoy it with me because I love history in that there are lots of unsolved mysteries or things that we can go and research and explore and try and figure out and imagine what it would be like. So, as you hear this story, and maybe you're studying the original North American colonies and colonization and the 13 original colonies, and you're familiar with the ones that existed, but there were some that came before that weren't so successful. Roanoke was one of them. So at the end of this story, I want you to think, what is your theory about the lost colony of Roanoke? Okay? That is your job. Oh my goodness. Let's see. The book's going to cooperate with me this time. When I grow up, I want to be a detective, just like my dad. He says I was born curious, and curiosity is the best tool a detective can have. Right now, I'm curious about old mysteries that have never been solved. In police terms, these cases are called open, but Dad and I call them unsolved mysteries from history, and I am determined to figure out at least one of them. For each mystery, I collect as much about the case as I can. As I go along, I organize the clues in my notebook. Sometimes I use timelines, and I always keep a list of words that are important to the case. Roanoke, the lost colony, is about a group of English people who came to America, the American continent, in the 1500s to begin a new settlement. They all disappeared. Though lots of people have ideas or theories about what might have happened, no one is sure. My dad says no mystery is impossible to solve as long as you have enough clues. This is how the story goes. So I love this because it's from the perspective of a young person, and her cat's involved, of course. And she takes notes. She writes down important words to the case. She has maps and timelines. So we end up learning a little bit about research at the same time. The word Roanoke comes from the Roanoke people, an Algonquin tribe that lived in the area. However, the European settlers who felt they had discovered the New World, which consisted of North and South America, also believed they were the land's rightful owners. Without regard for the natives' rights to the land, they considered it part of Virginia and claimed it for their own. Today, that piece of coastline is part of North Carolina. In the year 1587, England and Spain were at war. A major battleground was the New World. Along the east coast, forts were scattered, the one at Roanoke manned by English soldiers, an early colony of 108 men, complaining about the harsh conditions and lack of supplies, had returned home. They had been poorly prepared for life in the New World and had depended upon the native people for food while treating them badly. Never good to treat the people who feed you badly, but oh well. There had been frequent fights, and the colonists had accidentally infected the native people with European diseases. A native chief had been slaughtered. This was not a good way to begin a new settlement. New soldiers had arrived at the abandoned fort to hold it until new colonists could arrive. And colonists were sure to come. The lure of gold and farmland were too strong for any complaints to matter. Colonists, a group of settlers in a new country, still subjects of their mother country. And what I like about this book is it shows you her notes, and then what she turns her ideas or theories into, and then her important words. Here we go. John White's drawings recorded everything he saw in the New World. White was not a great artist. In one of the paintings, a native woman even had 2 right feet. His work was to serve science, not art. Only some of John White's paintings survived, about 75 originals. Charter, a royal or government document granting rights. Community, a group of people living in one place. John White was a loyal Englishman and an artist. He was chosen to lead the colony by Sir Walter Raleigh, who had been given the charter to the land in Roanoke by the Queen. White may not have had leadership skills, but he had already been to the New World. He had brought back paintings of the new plants, animals, people. The colonists were chosen by Raleigh and White to build the new community. There were more than 60 men, farmers, craftsmen, artisans. There were close to 20 women, including White's own pregnant daughter, to work in the fields and houses. There were almost a dozen children. The word Indian was used for the native people of the New World because Christopher Columbus landed in the Bahamas in 1492. Though he thought he was in India, when the colonists landed on Rhode Island, they referred to the native people as savages because they did not understand their customs, manner of dress, or culture. Today, Native Americans, Native peoples, and Indian are all acceptable, though the native peoples themselves prefer to be known by their individual tribal names. 2 native men were also part of White's group. One of them, Mateo, had traveled in the company of the English before. John White hoped they would help the colonists with the local native people. He knew that the earlier colonists had had problems with fights, with diseases, with killings, though he had never told Raleigh. He was sure that with the soldiers already at the fort and with Mateo to help, he could keep his colonists safe. Wonder how that's going to work out. Oh, right, it's a lost colony. Probably not well. Let's see. For long ocean journeys, several types of ships were generally used, including flagship, the fleet's largest, best, or safest ship, on which the commander sailed, flyboat, a large boat with 1 or 2 masts, generally square-rigged, pinnace, a smaller, faster, more maneuverable boat that sometimes carried oars, fertile, capable of supporting a plentiful crop, tortoise, land turtle of the warm climates, a good food source because the meat doesn't spoil quickly. Poor tortoises. The colonists left Portsmouth on April 26, 1587. They planned to meet with the soldiers, then go to Chesapeake Bay, north of Roanoke, where the land was more fertile and the harbor was safer. They sailed in 3 boats, a flyboat, a pinnace, and the flagship Yolen. After a month and a half at sea, they reached the Americas at last, stopping first on several islands. At Santa Cruz, several colonists ate green fruit. Their lips and tongues swelled badly. A number of people drank from a pond that had water so evil they fell dreadfully ill. Some who washed their faces in the water had swollen eyes for 5 or 6 days after. They captured 5 huge tortoises for meats so large 16 men became exhausted hauling them back to ship. Poor tortoises. Let's see. At last, the flagship dropped anchor outside Roanoke's shallow harbor. White and 40 of his men planned to take the pinnace to shore to meet with the soldiers, then continue on to Chesapeake, where they were going to stay. But the ship's pilot, Simon Fernandez, had other ideas. He refused to take the colonists any further and put them all ashore at Roanoke. When White and his men got to the fort ahead of the larger group of colonists, they found it razed. Great melon vines grew in what remained of the houses. Deer grazed there. All that was left of the soldiers was a single skeleton. "We must make the best of what we have," said White, so they began to repair the houses. Razed, destroyed completely by having been torn down. The coastline that the colonists sailed along is made up of dangerous inlets and coves. A ship coming upon the shore first encounters barrier islands parallel to the coastline, then the mainland itself. At the bottom of these waters, sometimes called the graveyard of the Atlantic, hundreds of ships and boats lie wrecked. Well, that's encouraging. So here we go. There's that skeleton. While work continued on the buildings, one man, George Howe, went fishing alone. Stripping off his clothes, he waded into shallow water, trying to catch crabs with a small forked stick. When he did not return, the others searched for him. They found him dead, riddled with arrows. The colonists suspected Indians had killed him. White sent Mateo and 20 men to Croatoan Island, where the nearest native people lived. They approached the village with drawn muskets, which frightened the peaceful Croatoans, until they saw Mateo, who translated their story. 4 soldiers were in a boat fishing. 30 of our enemies from several other tribes surrounded the soldiers at the fort. Men on both sides were killed. The soldiers who were not hurt ran to the boat and rowed away. We never saw them again. George Howe was killed by the same people. The Croatoans then pleaded for a token by which the English would know them as friends. No token was given. Riddled, pierced with many holes, musket, a long, heavy gun that fires a ball-shaped bullet. Token, a keepsake given as evidence of, in this case, friendship. One Indian, a man named Moiti, who had himself visited England and was known by the soldiers, was part of a plot to starve the soldiers out. Later, he led his people against the colonists, killing George Howe. Later that week, the English mounted a surprise attack in the middle of the night on the people they thought had killed Howe. Spying a campfire, they shot one man and chased the others through the reeds, including women and children. But the colonists had made a terrible mistake. These were friendly Croatoans who, knowing their enemies had left the area, had come to gather up peas, corn, pumpkin, tobacco. As a reward for faithful service, the English christened Mateo a few weeks later, calling him Lord of Roanoke and Das Munkilp. They thought that this would make him a better friend to the English and a loyal subject of Queen Elizabeth. What Mateo thought of the ceremony is unknown. A christening is a ceremony in which an individual is admitted to the Christian church by baptism. During the ceremony, a name can be given to a child or a title to an older individual. Flight, a difficult and serious situation. Destination, a place to which someone is going. White buried most prized possessions because other times when he'd left for several days on scouting or drying trips, many of his supplies had been used by others. He was taking no chances. On August 18th, White's daughter Eleanor gave birth to Virginia Dare, the first English child born in America. This was cause for great celebration. But summer was drawing to a close, and the colonists started to worry. They were quickly running out of supplies. No one knew they were on Roanoke Island. They were supposed to be in Chesapeake, 50 miles to the north. Should they move there? Should they send someone back to England to let Raleigh know of their plight? White was pressured to go. He hated leaving his daughter and new grandchild, but the colonists were convinced he was the best man for the job. So he buried his notebooks, drawings, map, and armor, and worked out a special code with the colonists. If you leave, carve your destination on a tree. Put a cross if there has been trouble. 9 days later, on August 27th, White set sail for England. The Spanish Armada was a fleet of 130 galleons, or warships, and 30,000 men. It was thought to be unbeatable. Spain tried to invade England in 1588, but the English ships were smaller, faster, and easier to maneuver in the channel between England and the European continent. Plus, England had control of all the ports. The Armada was eventually crushed entirely by the English. Conspired, combined into common effort, privateering, acting legally as a pirate with a letter of commission from the king or queen. White left Roanoke in a storm, an awful crossing, desperate to get to England, desperate to round up supplies, desperate to return quickly to Roanoke colony. But politics, war, and a Spanish armada all conspired to keep him in England. There was nothing he could do. Half a year later, in the spring, White tried to sail with 2 small ships filled with sailors, 15 new colonists, and supplies. But the sailors insisted on privateering along the way. They attacked not only Spanish ships, but a Scottish boat and a French ship as well. White was wounded twice in hand-to-hand combat. All of the colonists' supplies were stolen. They limped back to England. Oops. It was March 20, 1590, before Raleigh could gather enough money to send any other ships. 5 months later, having survived storms and more fights, the ships anchored at the tip of the Croatoan Islands. Finally, they moved on to the outer island. Even though it was evening, White and his men could see smoke rising from the vicinity of Roanoke Fort. In the morning, they tried to row ashore in 2 small boats through terrible waves. 1 boat capsized, 7 men drowned. Vicinity, the surrounding area. So back in the day, even though they were sailors, they often didn't know how to swim. Not to mention, the sea waves would have been something else. Palisades, a high fence with large posts set firmly in the ground. Pigs. Oblong masses of a particular kind of metal, in this case lead. Iron shot. Pellets of iron that are shot from a gun. Anchoring in a shallow harbor that night, they tried to alert the colonists by sounding a trumpet, by singing English folk songs loudly, by calling out to the people on shore. There was no answer. In the morning, they went to the fort. It was completely empty. Carved into a tree near the village were the letters C-R-O. On one of the palisade posts was the word Croatoan. There was no cross indicating any trouble. All that they found inside the fort were bars of iron, pigs of lead, iron shot. Once buried chests lay overturned, ransacked, including White's own possessions. The penance used by the colonist was gone. Weeds grew everywhere. John White returned to England. Due to storms, politics, money, history, he never set foot in the New World again, but other explorers did. John Smith, friend of Pocahontas, heard from 2 Indian tribes that clothed men still lived in the area. Later, Pocahontas's father admitted being part of an attack on the colonists. Smith did not speak of this until 14 years after returning to England. Another explorer, William Strachey, heard rumors in 1610 of Indians whose slaves built them stone-walled houses. Others heard stories of blonde, blue-eyed natives, yet no such clothed men, slaves, or blonde natives were ever found. Centuries later, the Lumbee of North Carolina claimed their ancestors were both Indian and English. In 1998, archaeologists discovered an English signet ring on a dig in nearby Hatteras Island. Could it have belonged to one of the lost colonists? No one can really be sure. Archaeologist, someone who studies ancient cultures, usually through items found buried in the ground. Signet ring, a ring with initials or a family crest engraved on it. The Lumbee are a tribe who lived primarily in around Robeson County, which is inland in North Carolina, just above the South Carolina border. They are convinced that the colonists from Roanoke married into the tribe. In fact, a number of them have the same last name as some of the Roanoke settlers. So what really happened? According to my dad, no one knows for sure, but now you have the whole story. You have studied my notes, the timeline, and the words listed. Perhaps you can solve the mystery of the Roanoke colony. Maybe you'll believe one of the old theories of what happened, or maybe you'll come up with a theory of your own. Only remember, as my dad always says, check your clues. 1. The no survivor theory. The colonists of Roanoke colony were killed by the local native people bent on revenge, or by the Spanish explorers who also wanted to colonize the same area. Did either group have reason for killing the colonists? Was there any evidence of murder? Was there any sign of distress, such as an engraved cross? Absorbed by native people theory. The colonists lived with the native peoples and eventually became part of the tribes by either marrying into the group or being captured as slaves. What would have made the colonists leave their homes? Was there any evidence of fighting? Did the native people keep slaves, and were any European slaves ever sighted or found? Do the Lumbee people claim to have European ancestors? 3. The lost at sea theory. The colonists tried to sail home to England and got lost at sea. Could the pinnace have carried 100 colonists? Could it have gotten through Spanish blockades or fought a major battle? Could it have survived major storms? Did the colonists leave clues as to where they were going? Did they bring their weapons and possessions? 4. The split community theory. A majority of the Roanoke colonists took the boat and sailed north as planned to Chesapeake, leaving behind a small contingent at the fort. The smaller group eventually left to go to the Croatoan Island. What clues were left behind? Were any of the colonists ever found at either Croatoan Island or Chesapeake? What would have made them split up? The white doe theory. There is a legend that Virginia Dare was raised by the Croatoan people, and when she refused to marry an old medicine man who loved her, he turned her into a white deer. Even today, people claim to see a mysterious white deer bounding through the North Carolina forest. Is there credible evidence to shape-shifting spells? Why would the local native people tell stories about Virginia Dare? So,